I got linked this video and I thought it was interesting because this is like a topic of conversation I've talked about before. And yeah. So the title of this video, first of all, is called WoW and the War Within is Bloated by Automatic Jack.
What's going on, guys? It's Jack. I'm a little cold, but I wanted to talk about how WoW has been getting so bloated and how I'm honestly kind of worried that the War Within is continuing on with that trend. One of the biggest things that we saw with Oracle Priest just last week was how the spec is having to juggle between buffs to be able to deliver the proper buffs onto the players when you need them, and it adds another element of like cognitive load to be able to play the spec, and it's really not the only one that's happening alongside of it. And there's been a lot of discussion throughout the community, and I wanted to kind of go over a couple of clips from what other creators have been saying about how WoW has just gotten very bloated over the years.
The skill ceiling of World of Warcraft used to be pretty low compared to other games. To do the most amount of damage with any given class is not rocket science, right? But the more they add of these kind of support classes, the higher the skill ceiling is when you combine it with like a raid group. Because nowadays it's actually incredibly hard to fully, like, to get the full amount of damage you can gain from a full raid group is actually really hard. Like,
and we also saw it with M+ when Aug Evoker was really coming into it, but it's also that WoW is so built on like a variety of modifiers and like multiplicative buffs on top of each other, where you were having the world first race with like Aug officers, where they would specifically sit down outside of the raid group just looking at logs the entire time to like min-max their damage. You would have obviously the PI combos with like Aug buffs that we had in like season 2, which has been obviously toned down a lot, but it's also just added to this bloat to the game where both like add-ons and the support specs have kind of like combined to add this like really large barrier of entry to be able to even play the game. And Asvin was also talking about this recently.
I think that this is even a problem without considering how all the different classes interact with each other. I think it's a problem even within just one class. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many insane modifiers. Like on Frost Mage, so here's like an example. Okay, so you're on Frost Mage, you can, let's just take Ice Lance as an example. Okay, so Ice Lance does a base amount of damage, and then it can also crit. So normal damage, crit damage on Ice Lance. That's fine. Then Ice Lance has a modifier with Fingers of Frost. So if you have Fingers of Frost, it does a certain amount of damage, and then of course that can crit or not crit. And then on top of Fingers of Frost, if you have Flurry on them and Fingers of Frost, that does even more damage. And then on top of that, if you have Fingers of Frost and they're rooted / Novad, so they have to, if they're rooted as well, then that has another modifier on it. So even within just Ice Lance, there's all these modifiers, and then there's even crazier things like using Icy Veins, and then of course like Trinket procs. And I feel like spells, just the variance in spells is way too crazy in my humble opinion. You know I get it's an RPG, it's fun to see big crits and stuff like that, but when a spell can like literally 5x on damage, in the case of Ice Lance even more than that, but yeah, when a spell can go from, you know, regular hitting for 40k to sometimes hitting for 200k, I feel like it's a bit crazy. And I kind of like the idea that spells just, you don't want boring rotations, but I also feel like they don't need to have that many modifiers on them.
Where there's a couple clips I want to show talking about how, yeah, WoW is like really sweaty, and it's gotten sweatier and sweatier over the years as they've made things harder. But add-ons.
Mortal Strike has a lot of damage mods, but they're all nerfed by 90% in PvP, so nothing you do actually matters. Mortal Strike having 4 different values that are invisible to the enemy, and to some extent of myself is lame. Yep. No, I agree. Like, it used to just be you press Mortal Strike and either crit or it didn't, or maybe you had some armor pen, and that's it. And then it was like, okay, then they added Colossus Smash, and then on top of Colossus Smash, they made it so you overpower stack, and now it's overpower and Colossus Smash, and then, okay, and then also there's now a modifier on Execute, so if you double overpower and then you Mortal Strike, plus you've executed, that does more damage, plus Colossus Smash is more damage, and then on top of that, it's fucking insane. It's too much. There's more modifiers to Sharpen, so it's like you have Sharpen, so Mortal Strike, crit, not crit, Sharpen Blade, 2 stacks of overpower, execute, like and then on top of that, like if you happen to be a little teacup spinner, your strength goes up even more. It's just, I do think that has gotten out of control. I do think there's too many modifiers. I've talked about this forever. This is not new. Modifiers are crazy. And I do think some interactions with like, okay, you do this spell first, and that makes the ability to do more. That's kind of cool. But when it's like boom and boom, 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 like 10 of them in a row, I think it's too much.
And I would honestly say most of it comes to the complexity of the specs in the game, which almost like requires the add-ons to be able to properly leverage. That has also added this element to the equation, which is increasingly just not friendly to new players.
Do you guys think these are going to be cool, these hero specs? Because, like, I think they could be cool, but my concern is that I think that if Blizzard tries to make them cool, it won't be balanced. And retail WoW is for a bunch of, like, try-hard nerds. Like, that's what retail WoW is all about.
Okay, so speaking as one of the, like, try-hard nerds, I see what he's saying, but like also a little bit later in the video, he also talks about how like you don't want to invite anybody who's gonna like make your life harder. It's like, yeah, you do want to min-max, but like what else is there for like endgame, you know? You want to make sure you're pushing the hardest progression possible or pushing with your friends and accomplishing the dungeon.
To be fair, this isn't just a retail thing. Did you guys play TBC? I don't know if you guys played the Burning Crusade, like classic TBC when it came out. It was insane. Like the amount of min-maxing in raid groups. It's like, okay, you have this, what was it, 25-man raids, and every single group you had to have a shaman. 100%. No doubt about it. You had to have a shaman. You had to have a melee group. You had to have a range group. You got to have a boomkin in your range group to make sure that they all have crit and blah. It's just modern WoW. Everyone wants the path of least resistance. Everyone wants to do the most damage. And if you just invite a player, even if the player isn't good, if they just happen to drop like a, you know, a modifier to your spell crits and additional spell damage and additional spell hit, or wind fury for, you know, it's a very simple thing to do to increase your gains. So everyone's going to do it.
And then it's not fun when someone kind of ruins the experience, even if it's an honest mistake or they just didn't have the experience. Like, yeah, if you don't complete the dungeon in time, it's not that fun. And
allowing some people to put in partial effort and other people not to put in partial effort, well, then you create a reward structure around putting in partial effort, and the people that are putting in full effort leave. So that's what happens.
Like every raid guild ever.
You discriminate on rats? I discriminate on anybody that doesn't put in, like, if you're not enchanting your gear, if you're not performing well. If I know you, obviously I'm going to give you special treatment because that's just the way it is. But otherwise, no, I absolutely discriminate. Like, if somebody is not like fully ready, or they're not like enchanted, or I don't feel like they're prepared, then yeah, fuck them.
So it really boils down to like, everyone is going to end up being sweatier in these games, whether it's going to be like people doing the season of discovery, like
his blankie looks, I'm actually really cold right now, and I want his blankie. That's like I'm like really cold, and that blanket looks really warm.
Pre-leveling tactics, which I think got nerfed, or whether it's retail players mapping out and you're using add-ons to figure out the best leveling route, or people figuring out the best way to farm seeds and Emir Drasil so they can get their infinite augment rune, so they can always have an augment rune, and that's their like min-max grind. Like, I don't know, there's always going to be this sweatiness in World of Warcraft. There's always going to be sweatiness in like pretty much every game you ever play these days. I think that was actually kind of the problem I had with New World, was that I felt like super behind when I was trying to do like a new player experience when I first started playing that in like beta. Was like everybody already had it figured out, and I felt like I was behind. But WoW also has the additional problem that, yeah, people are inevitably going to be sweaty, but when there's so much bloat to the game, when I would argue that dragonflight talents contributed more to bloat, I think.
Even when there's no bloat, people are sweaty though. That's what I was saying with like TBC and Classic and stuff like that. Like, it was so fucking annoying. I remember when Classic came out, I joined Hoagie Haven Hot Dogs. Oh, Hoagie Haven Heroes. Where they would charge you a raid tax to go to the raid. But that's a separate issue. But in our 40-man raid, we had 10 mages. Why? Because mages are OP. So fuck it. Stack them. As many as you can, you know? Half our raid was warriors and mages. Was that a requirement? No, but it just makes it easier. So even when the game isn't complex, people still cheese and make it as easy as possible.
Has been one of the clips that we have. He kind of talks about it, how they've scaled it back because they didn't have covenants. But I actually think they kind of made it worse in Dragonflight, especially for healers, because there was so much power creep. And I really think that the hero talents, Oracle in particular, are adding on to this power creep in a really big way that ups the amount of complexity. And even some of the like net neutral or slightly positive reviews that we've seen for some of the hero talents from other classes or specs, it still adds another element of like bloat that comes into the equation as well.
To me, like, I feel like I can't get into the game because there's so many things that are in the game. Like, there's just so much to it. And I've never really, I don't feel that way with Lost Ark. I don't feel that way with Final Fantasy. I don't feel that way with New World. But like, WoW just has like all of these extra like verticals of difficulty that like no other game has.
A shadow pine,
and just not even difficulty, like complexity.
And I think this complexity that he starts talking about, and we'll have another clip as well, really comes down to when you're trying to stack all these modifiers together, like Nagura was talking about in her clip. It comes down to how you're balancing out each of these individual dragonflight talents, which is somehow interacting with some of your larger cooldowns and stacking Shadowlands legendaries, Covenant abilities, old legendaries, even some like essence effects, all of these things sort of stacking together for like a new player experience.
By the way, Asmund loves PoE for the insane layers of complexity. Yeah, PoE is, when I look at PoE, I just shut up. Like I can't. When I look at PoE and all the shit that's there, I'm not playing that. I don't know. I'm too old. Can't handle it. Maybe I'll try PoE 2 when it comes out, but yeah, PoE 1 looks like the craziest thing ever.
So you don't want to just like have the game be dumbed down in its entirety, but every expansion adding something else onto the equation inevitably has this infinite sort of power creep to it. And that was actually some of the reason after MOP, really, that they started doing some like the class pruning, which obviously had a really like negative effect in the community, where they were really tired of like losing buttons and really tired of like losing extra abilities. But now we're kind of beginning this cycle again where people are looking at having too many keybinds. And one of the biggest things when it comes to a new expansion...
Do you guys feel like you have too many keybinds? Just like a quick little break. Do you feel like you have too many keybinds? On some specs I play, I feel like I do, but... Look, yes, no, not on Demon Hunter. On some specs. I feel like there's some specs that are good, and then there's some that have like unnecessary buttons. You know? Like on Frost Mage, I feel like sometimes I feel like you have too many attacks. On Frost Mage, I really feel like you have too many attacks. And they actually pruned some of them with the mage rework. They like got rid of Ebb and Bolt and stuff like that, but I swear there's still so many. You have like, yeah, 15. Some like when you look at like a class of breakdown, some of them are really clean, you know? But then you look at others and they have 20 damage sources. You know? 20. That's pretty crazy.
They always want to bring something new to the equation. They always want to add something new to the equation. And I understand that. And it makes sense when you're trying to sell new expansions that you want some reason for people to come back. But then it always seems to boil down to another way that classes get like more deeply complex. Now, Final Fantasy, on the other hand, I haven't played it like super crazy in depth for multiple expansions the way I have with WoW, but I was playing it for Shadowbringers into Endwalker, and one of the things I really liked about it was that there were some slight reworks to how the spec was. And I was playing a lot of Astrologian, and then obviously I played a little bit of Sage, a little bit of White Mage, but there weren't these like full additional abilities or full like fledged massive amounts of bloat. Like I think going into Endwalker, we got like a new raid cooldown or something like that, but it was like one extra keybind maybe that was getting added into the equation. And then they were simplifying how you were like drawing cards and cycling cards or something.
I haven't actually seen like how many extra abilities are the talent trees. As far as I saw, most of them are just passive, right? The only one I really paid attention to was the Frostfire Mage one. I think you only get like one ability or something.
And as a result,
but maybe it's just all the modifiers from the passive that makes it too complex.
New things on top of each other that you had to be able to juggle around, but it was more so like cleaning things up. And one of the ways a lot of people in the community were really hoping that a lot of these hero talents would actually go would be that they'd be more along the side of cosmetics for class skins. Kind of the way that people were hoping.
Thank you, Fabernass.
Covenants were
I appreciate that, brother.
Cosmetic and less about a variety of different ways of building up power.
Blizzard doesn't understand after the failures of the past of player power connected systems, it's constant half measures instead of giving players what they're asking for.
Because if you were having things that were going to be more cosmetic, or they were going to be more about your choice, or like how things are going to be appearing, and they're going to be appearing really cool, but it's not going to add some like extra level of complexity to the equation, then you're able to look a little bit cooler without having to go through, you know, Oracle Priest, which is having all these additional add-ons on hand to be able to track the buffs, or weak auras to be able to track which buff that you're cycling between and deliver it to the right target. Or in the case of the Keeper of the Grove setup, you're having to adjust your spellcasting sequence as a Resto Druid to be able to properly balance out a number of buffs that you have on hand that you previously did not have to worry about before. And then it was just coming down to cosmetics. Because when it's always coming down to this player power equation, it's always going to add another layer of complexity on hand to be able to deal with the content. And keep in mind that the content's also getting harder, and historically has been getting harder over time. I think Sepulchre was obviously a huge step up that we had in difficulty. They kind of brought it back down for Vaults of the Incarnates. It got a bit harder and aberrant.
I disagree with that. New expansions should change playstyles. There should be probably more ability replacements with changing hero talents rather than just adding new ones. Yeah, I think that would be a really good place to start. I think instead of maybe adding a bunch of new abilities, the hero talents are more transformative. They transform the abilities you already have. Maybe you should get no new abilities. Like literally not a single new ability from the hero talents. Just transforms abilities you already have. I feel like that could be cool. But the other thing is balance is gonna be crazy. Because now it's not just like okay, we got to balance mages. Okay, we got to balance not just mages, but frost mages. And then we got to balance fire mages. And then we got to balance arcane mages. And we have to balance them in Mythic Plus. And we have to balance them for the raid. And we have to balance them for arena and solo shuffle. But now it's like, there's on top of that, okay, it's mage. Okay, it's an arcane mage. Okay, it's an arcane mage that plays Mythic Plus. Okay, and he's a spell slinger. You know, it's another level of things they have to balance. I really don't envy the devs position that they're in for having to do that. I think it's going to be a very difficult task.
And then, of course, it capped off with the equation here in Mirjasil, where that is sort of the natural sort of life expectancy that you're going to see for a lot of expansions, where, yeah, you're going to have each raid tier sort of step up in difficulty, and then it kind of resets a little bit, and then it keeps going up and up and up. But one of the biggest things is that the trend always ends up going higher over time, and that's where having the content getting more difficult over time and then classes getting more difficult over time makes it a lot more difficult to bring new people into the equation. Now, Asmon in this video said a lot about like making sure you just get rid of add-ons in its entirety. I don't really agree with that, but there's
PvEer, of course. No, I'm kidding.
Certainly is a lot of bloat that I do agree with that happens in the class trees, that happens in the spec trees as they get more bloated. And I really think that a lot of these hero talents are just adding on to the bloat. And eventually, I think what's actually going to happen with these hero talents, if not in beta, then certainly over the course of the War Within's life, is they're probably going to get less and less important to operating your spec and become more and more about the flavor and more about the cosmetics, which is something that players are early on really calling for. Just like players were very early on calling for Shadowlands Covenants to be swappable all the time. It feels like we're kind of repeating that cycle once more.
Yeah, I think that people are right to complain about it, but I think that the real problem with WoW is like just on a fundamental level, the way that the game is designed. Like the game is designed in a way that is built completely around optimization and min-maxing. And that's happened because you have 15 years of optimization and min-maxing. And like in classic WoW, it's not as bad. It's still there, but it's not as pronounced. It's
pretty bad, but maybe in classic WoW, it's primarily bad because of the community. Like the difficulty of the content in classic WoW, you don't necessarily need to be insanely min-max to get it done, but people do min-max in a crazy way to just make it as easy as possible because they want to have like 1 week clears and stuff like that, you know? Like they go as hard as possible to min-max. I would say as a community, people in Classic are arguably more sweaty than on retail. But maybe from like a design standpoint, that's not necessarily the case. The min-maxing doesn't matter as much, but the community forces you to min-max in a crazy way.
Not as important.
That's the thing is, I think it is still going to be very pronounced regardless of what happens, but Blizzard, of course, has the option of how they want to set aside like their baseline, because the more that you add into the equation to min-max, the more that you're going to have this like vast gap between players. The more that you're going to have players who are going to be separated by having add-ons and being able to interpret the add-ons appropriately. Players that do have add-ons and are having like a bad UI setup or a lot of like issues of like tracking too many buffs or tracking the wrong things. And then over here, you're having players who are brand new to the game, have to learn how to experience the content itself, the raids, the dungeons, the PvP, what the heck crowd control is and DRs are, right? They have to experience all of that without being able to interpret the information because there's 50 million different add-ons that you have, and trying to get somebody in a new player in.
I would say that WoW has always been a really complex game, and one of the main difficulties of WoW and getting into WoW is not only having to know your class, specifically in PvP, you need to not only know your class and all your abilities and all your defensives and how to burst, but in order to like truly succeed, you also have to know how all the other classes work, which is a very tall order. Like you're having to learn like what 400 different abilities pretty much and how they all interact with each other. And there's still things that I learned. Like this expansion has been going on for a really, really long time. I didn't even know about Inner Demon. I didn't know that every single time you turned into a demon, your next annihilation summoned some bullshit that one-shot you. Like I didn't know about that until I started playing Demon Hunter. And it's like that with every class I play. There's some like hidden mechanic I don't know about, and the more classes I play and learn, like obviously I get better based off that. But yeah, I think WoW has always kind of been a really complicated game. I don't think we'll ever get to a point where this is like super smushed down, these graphs that both Asmon and Jack have done.
2024, from this part to all the way over here, feels like it's gotten wider and wider and wider than ever. But of course,
maybe that's true.
Everybody does want to be sweaty. Everybody does want to make sure they complete the content. Asmongold, like we mentioned, said that himself. So where is it that Blizzard's actually going to be able to do something productive? I don't think it's getting rid of add-ons in its entirety, but I do think that the more that they add on lots and lots of class-specific buffs, the more it's pushing players and it's pushing this gap between players to be wider than it is ordinary.
I agree with that. I do think one of the problems is, and we've talked about this the whole video, but I do think one of the problems is there's so many modifiers that you have to keep track of. It is very complex, and without add-ons, the base UI does not do a very good job explaining it, you know? Like, if you go, I'll give you an example. If you go right now and you watch basically any arcane mage that plays, you're going to see that he tracks like 10 different buffs with Tell Me When. He's going to track his arcane tempo for his haste stacks. He's going to track his buffed arcane blast after he uses arcane missiles. He's going to track the 4-piece, like after you use 3 arcane missiles, you get an empowered arcane missiles. Like there's a ton of buffs that you have to track on arcane just to effectively play it at all. And I'm sure other classes are like that as well. And the game does a really bad job at a base of explaining that to you. So you kind of need add-ons. Even for people that are the best, they still need add-ons to play just at a normal level.
One of the good things about borrowed power systems in the past was that eventually you got rid of them and they were replaced by something new. While there were tons of problems with the acquisition, I think the general idea of like, here you have this power, okay, it doesn't actually carry forward into the next expansion with you, here's a new power to replace it, so you're not just like constantly perma-bloated all the time. Actually,
I'm bloated.
bad. It's just the acquisition of like getting that for your main, getting that for your alts. Just
Ate too much
burn
oatmeal.
people out. And I don't think that acquisition's necessarily gotten better with like the extra upgrade system that we have on hand, because it's still a pain in the ass to gear alts, but maybe that's a video for another time.
Not a pain in the ass in PvP. Hell yeah. Let's go. They're not a pain in the ass in PvP. We love PvP. Thumbs up for PvP.
At the moment, I am really of the opinion that the hero talents are not really heading in the direction I think the community wants and the community needs to be able to actually welcome in new players into a new expansion, adapt them and sort of onboard them into like how the game works. have them experience it and like wanting to get better and like wanting to improve.
Wait, can someone do me a big favor before this video ends? Can you link me the Frostfire talents? I want to look at them. I want to see how many new abilities you get. Like, I want to take a deeper look. Now that this is fresh in my mind, maybe I could find them. But if anyone could find that for me really quick, I'd love it. I just want to look at the Frostfire talents and see how many passives versus active abilities we get and how many are just transformative abilities.
So that they can do their dungeons or do their raids with friends. And I think that Blizzard's doing a really massive disservice to themselves because it just gets that much harder to get new blood in to the mix. Let me know what you guys think, if you agree or disagree, and maybe I'll have to have a whole video dedicated to borrowed power and how I think it actually is a good theoretical system. It was just badly executed because of how acquisition worked. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch y'all next time.
Yay, Jack. Make sure you guys go check out Jack's YouTube channel, by the way, Automatic Jack. There's a lot of PvE content, primarily healer. I'll link the video. You guys can go leave a comment and a thumbs up. We're going to check this out, though, before I conclude this. Okay, so let's see here. Frostfire Mage. Let's see. The War Within Hero Talent. Okay, so what do we got? Frostfire Mastery. So this is a passive. Blazing Bear also casts a passive. Frostfire Bolt. So this is a transformative. So we have passive, passive, transformative, passive, 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 passive. So actually every single thing is a passive or is transformative. They actually added Frostfire Bolt, yeah. But it's still going to come down to like all these new things that you have to track. But there's actually, in terms of button bloat, for Frostfire, there's actually no button bloat. 0. All the circular talents are passives? Yeah, but even these are like, you melt slightly out of your ice block and ice cold, allowing you to move slowly during the ice block. Every single one of these is just either completely transformative or just completely passive. So you literally get 0 extra buttons. And apparently it's like that for Paladin too. Let's take a look. Holy Paladin. So maybe it is what I thought. Maybe it's not going to be as bad as we think. Maybe they realize that. So it's a passive, 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 everything. I think that's cool. That's what I want. I think that's really cool. Like if you can play Frostfire and it makes your frost abilities like more fiery, or you're a fire mage and it makes your abilities more frosty, like I think that's cool. It depends on how complex the passives are. True, but at least it's not extra buttons. But I do think it is what he said, where it's like it's going to require even more add-ons and weak auras to track and to min-max, and I do think that that can be a problem. But yeah, interesting video, and I think it's a good topic. And the reason why I like going over these is because the War Within, you know, it's not even in alpha yet. It's like pre-alpha. We haven't had a chance to really look at too much of it, but I think just getting these discussions out there is really, really important, because I really want this next expansion to kick ass, and it's looking good so far. But